I got the green light here. Okay. Is everything sounding like, am I close enough to the microphone here? Awesome. Awesome. Alrighty, well, good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Good. Good. Well, glad you're all here today. Welcome to Intro to Composting. Hope that's what you guys signed up for here. This is not any other, this isn't like sewing or anything. So if you're there for that class, you might be looking for something upstairs. Um, I'm Calvin Gardner, and I am the Residential Urban Horticulture Extension Agent for Orange County. I teach gardening, and my last name is Gardner, so I get that a lot. Um, and what I do for the University of Florida is that I'm an extension agent who works out of the extension office down on South Conway Road. And my role is to help people who live in the city. If they live in the country, I don't mind either, but mostly in the city with their plants, whether it's in their front yard, their backyard, or in their home. It sounds vague because it is. Um, I work with people's lawns, I work with people's ornamental shrubs in their backyard, and I work with vegetable gardens. And by far, vegetable gardens are my favorite because I love eating food and I love cooking. And so it just makes my job really awesome. So I work with all these different things. And if you ever had any questions about what you wanted to plant in your front yard, or maybe you have a plant that's not doing very well and has a disease, or you want to figure out how to grow some special kind of broccoli, we are the people who you talk to. And you can always reach out to us. You can reach out to me actually directly through that email right there. But then if you go and look at our website for Orange County IFAS Extension, you'll also find an email there and you can shoot us an email. And we actually have a plant clinic there that if you have like sickly plants or maybe something that's going to be something that's being eaten and you don't know what's eating it, you can always bring in samples or take a lot of pictures and send them to us, and we can diagnose some of those issues as long as we have enough data. That's our resource to you. It's a free resource. We are funded by your taxpayer dollars, so please use that resource. Um, anyway, that's what the University of Florida IFAS Extension does. We do a lot of other things as well when it comes to cooking or finance management. We run the gamut on just about anything agriculture and surrounding agriculture. But today specifically, we're going to talk about composting. So, who here already composts? Sweet. So, I'm speaking to a good crowd. Who here has a successful composter? Okay. That's pretty good numbers for who raised their hand the first time around. Perfect. Well, um, composting can be a tricky task, but once you get it down, it really helps you reduce a lot of the different waste streams that you create. And it's a great way to divert a lot of different waste from your home into your backyard and actually to make your plants a lot healthier. So let's kind of dive into it. First things first, this is Florida Friendly Landscaping Principle number 7. We teach out of our Florida Friendly Landscaping program. It's a program that was started about, I think, 30 plus years ago. And we figured out how you could have a successful lawn in Florida by using native plants and by using plants that still play well in Florida but aren't exactly native. And by doing so, you can create a yard that uses less water, uses less fertilizer, and hopefully has less maintenance as well. It still looks very beautiful and attractive. But why is this important that we need to be recycling yard waste, and why is it one of our principles? We have 9 principles, and one of them is to recycle yard waste. Well, if you look at the 2022 municipal solid waste production in Florida, which I'm sure you do on a day-to-day basis, um, we have all of these different waste streams that go directly into our dumps, maybe put into different trash heaps somewhere. We don't really know half the time. So if you look at this pie chart, newspapers, corrugated cardboard, office paper, other paper, yard waste, and food waste, this huge chunk right here, that is all able to be composted. And so we can divert that waste stream directly into a compost pile, and we can make a huge dent in the kind of pollution that we allow into basically a junkyard or wherever you put trash. I'm blanking on it now. Um, and we can keep it in our front yard. All right, so what are the goals of composting? We want to reduce landfill yard waste. We want to recycle yard and food waste, and we want to produce compost for your garden. Now, what is composting? You're using a natural process to decay down organic materials. That is what it is at its core. This is happening all around us. I don't know if these are real plants. They don't look like it. But if they were, they would be going through the composting process in their soil. Everything wants to break down over time. And we are just doing special things to kind of speed up the process and make it go by faster and make it more efficient and also a little bit more sterile. So, the natural process of decay is going to take a few of the things that we can already find in our homes and around our homes. So, grass clippings are really important, food scraps, and leaves. There are a few other things you can throw in here. Actually, in theory, anything that was once living you can compost. The thing is, you got to be really good at composting. So don't just go throwing like meat and dairy into your compost pile until you become a master composter. Alrighty, so what you'll end up getting is a dark brown, crumbly, porous, soil-like material. It's often confused with soil, but is in fact slightly different. So soil is comprised of weatherized rock. Our soil here, you can just call it sand. Um, but it has a special name. Does anybody know the special name of our soil? The special, like our state soil. Sand. It is comprised of sand, but it has a name. Good try. It is Mayaka. And we have a lot of it. And it's basically what every single state has a state soil, if you didn't know that. But that's what ours is. And it's very sandy. But if you look at it from like a cutaway, it's like very sandy. And then it has like a lot of organic material underneath. So it's got a great personality. You sort of get through the first few layers. Um, this is compost. So the difference between it is that soil is made of, like we said, rock and different particles. Compost is much more living. And I think a better way to explain this is you have three different things. You have dirt, and dirt is really not alive. It's mostly inorganic. Then you have soil, which is a mix of inorganic and organic. And then you have compost, which is just like mostly organic. It's very biological. And it's really important to be adding it to our soils. And why is that? Because it will improve your soil quality. So it increases moisture retention, it increases aeration, and it reduces erosion potential. It also stimulates beneficial soil microorganisms. So it gives them a good environment, it gives them a lot of food that they can be basically using throughout the process as they break down other nutrients within the soil. It will also help you save on your gardening bills. It will help you with your soil amendment savings. It won't save you per se with your fertilizer savings, but it will help you with the soil that you're going to be purchasing. It will help you with your water use savings, and it will help you with yard waste disposal costs. So let's take a quick stop at this point, because some people are like, is this really going to save me money? Is this really that important that I do it? Am I just trying to help the environment, or is there something in it for me? Because we might actually be wanting something for our garden. Well, the University of Florida did a study on this, and they went to the villages where we have a bunch of houses going up all the time. And a lot of people's yards were not doing so hot after about a year. So they looked at the sites and they saw that there were basically tractors and different kind of bulldozers just coming over these plots and flattening them and laying down landscaping soil. So it was like extremely sandy. And then they were just throwing sod over the top of it. And so after about a year or so, their plants would end up dying and their yards would look brown and not so hot. So one of our researchers um, came along and cooked compost and put about an inch of a layer over the top of it. Now this wasn't just like any compost that he just like made in his backyard. It was very scientifically done. We had the right ratios of everything, so it was all uniform and we knew what compost we were using. Anyway, he puts it down about an inch over the top of all the land there. And what they ended up finding out is over time, they let these houses kind of grow their sod right next to the other houses that didn't do it. And the aerial pictures are insane. One, the yards stay greener for longer. Doesn't mean that they don't go into dormancy when it gets cold, but they were greener for longer. They required less fertilizer. And the best part is they figured out that they could reduce watering by 50%. That's pretty massive because in Florida, the average water bill, if you have a lawn, 50% of your water bill goes to your lawn. So if you can cut your lawn by 50%, you can cut your water bill by 25%. So it's a big deal. And they've been doing further studies on the fact that, like, if you didn't drop a bunch of compost before you put down your sod, that you could actually top dress, where you just go out there and you sprinkle it over the grass over time, and it actually has similar effects. So it really can save you money, and it really can save you a lot of time and effort and paying Massey to come out and spray a bunch of fungicides. So, not that I have anything against Massey. Composting. So you're gonna need four things. Composting is like making a good dough. Who was like a COVID baker in here, right? Like we all got into like making bread and sourdough and everything, and it's super similar. This is an organism, and essentially you're trying to get it to bake itself. But it's gonna need four things. It's gonna need air, water, food, and temperature. And it doesn't like need temperature, but you're gonna need to keep a good track on it. By managing these factors, you're going to basically tune up this compost pile. You can hit the gas pedal on it, or you can just skirt it to a stop. And I think most of us have figured out that you can really just stop a compost pile dead in its tracks, and it will just stop producing for you. So we need to appeal to what is creating the biological processes within this compost pile. That is where we look at the soil food web. So most of the organic matter that you are going to be breaking down, which again, organic matter is just things that were once living, they will be broken down by bacteria and fungi. Now, bacteria play arguably a bigger role in this process, but fungi play a key role that the bacteria can't, which is they break down a lot of the wood within your pile. So, what happens is they begin to break down all this stuff, and then over time, it kind of makes its way up a food web. So, as you can see, as these bacteria grow a bigger population, they will move up to things like roundworms and protozoa that will eat those bacteria. And then other things will come in. So you have worms coming in and eating them, and then maybe fungi will be taking over. And then we have mites and beetles that will be eating those. And then the gross part is they're going to eat the fungi and then they're going to poop out the fungi. And that will basically release some of the nutrients that were in the original debris back into the pile, but now they're available for the plants. And that's what everything in this process is going to do. It's just going to eat what we have here. It's going to poop some of it out, and then it's going to get eaten. And then it's going to get pooped out, which is gross, but this is how the system works. So it's going to create this food web here, and you will see it move all the way up this line as more and more different organisms and the bigger organisms come along. So some people are like, why are there so many cockroaches in my compost pile? And I can tell you it's probably because they're doing a lot of the decay and breaking down, and hopefully something else eats them so you don't have to deal with it. Chickens, yes. We have a lot of lizards at my office that we just like, we'll flip a compost pile and then the lizards will just, it's like Jurassic Park. It's just gnarly. So, um, we have food. So we need to be feeding these decomposers. So the main people we're trying to appease here are the bacteria and the fungi. And how do we do that? Well, there's two things we need to keep in mind. We need to keep in mind browns and greens. Now, browns are going to decay very slowly. They're not going to be very succulent. They're going to snap and break in half. They're going to be high in carbon. Carbon is important. Carbon is the reason why compost works really well. It's the basis for life. And like I said, it holds on to water, but it also, as they say in chemistry class, carbon bonds with everything. So it bonds with the fertilizer you put in the ground so it doesn't sink past your soil and keep going deeper towards the aquifer. It stays in your soil, saves you more money because you're not using as much fertilizer. So we need a lot of carbon. And carbon is going to be the main basis of what that, when you pull out your compost, it's primarily carbon. But In order to break down carbon, you are going to need nitrogen because a lot of the bacteria, a lot of the fungi to break things down need an extra food source. They can't just live directly off of carbon, so they need nitrogen to break it down. So those are the things that decay rapidly. Um, they don't particularly have poor, or they don't particularly have great aeration because of how much water they have in them. So the way we look at this is like the browns accumulate in the fall when all your dead leaves hit the ground. You can save those up because they are basically dried up and you can keep them in a place that will stay dry. But then when the greens come along in the spring and the summer, like when you have to mow your yard every week and a half or so, even every 4 days, it feels like, um, you'll have a bunch of bags of grass, and that is perfect nitrogen for this. But who has left a bag of grass on the sidewalk for too long and walked by and been like, that smells like horse manure? You know? So that's nitrogen. That's ammonia gassing off of there. And it smells horrible, but we need it. And we may have had compost piles that smell the same way. And I can tell you there's a way to fix that. But we need both of these guys to have a really good compost pile. So here's some examples of browns. We have leaves, straw, paper, animal bedding with manure. I wouldn't throw in the animal bedding with manure on the first go around. Once you get a successful pile, then go ahead and throw in your rabbit cage, aspen that's been in there or something. So, um, and then you also have greens. Greens are going to be vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, grass clippings, manure, horse manure, poultry with litter, elephant manure. Apparently, you work for Disney. Um, I didn't make this presentation, but I do love it. So let's look back at this. So you see all these numbers right here? 30 to 80 to 1. This is how much carbon we have to nitrogen. So these have a lot of carbon and nitrogen in them. There's still nitrogen, but there's not as much as if you look at your greens. We're looking at 12 to 20 to 1, 20 to 1, 12 to 25 to 1, all of these things. So manure is always high in nitrogen. And that's why we say when things are eating each other, pooping each other out, we're getting a lot more nitrogen out of this pile. The reason why nitrogen is important is because it's basically the basis to how plants grow. It's one of their vital nutrients. They're nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so the more nitrogen we can get into this pile, the more of an effect it will have on the plants that we choose to put it on after the fact. So what's your green to brown ratio? Well, you just got to shoot for 30 to 1 carbon and nitrogen. So good luck figuring out what these ratios are here, adding them together very meticulously, and then getting a perfect mixture. I've never seen anybody do it unless you're on an industrial scale. So there's a much easier way to do it, and you can just use your nose for it. And look at the pile. So we'll talk about that in a second. But to still drive it home, there is a ratio here. You want a 30 to 1 carbon and nitrogen. All right, so here are some of the organic waste that should be composted. So you have your garden trimmings, typically greens, kitchen scraps, also greens, clippings, greens, and then leaves, which are your browns. If you trimmed up a tree and it had really thin branches, you could snap them up and bring them in. But part of the equation is going to be surface area. You want a high surface area so that it's easy to break down. Um, and if you have like larger logs or things that you're trying to cut down, you can always chip them and throw them in there. That will help speed up the pile a lot. You can also just chip things and use them as mulch over the ground. They will break down over time as well if you have too many wood chips. So what are some bad compost materials? You do not want to compost meat scraps, pet manure, fats or oils, diseased plants, noxious or perennial weeds, recently fungicide treated plants. That's really important because the fungus is going to be super important to this whole equation. Eggshells do tend to attract pests, but if you grind them up, you'll have much more success. And then citrus and wood ash. I would say I've never really heard anybody destroy their pile because they put too much citrus and wood ash in it, but you still want to be careful, especially because citrus, as a whole does attract pests in general. But if you create a compost pile correctly, you still won't have those issues. This all comes with a huge caveat that, again, if you got really good at composting, you wouldn't have to follow these rules because you can break them down. Really fatty things die all the time and they hit the ground like a cow dies. It's full of fat, or maybe a pig dies, and eventually it does turn into soil. We all eventually turn into soil. But the process at which it happens is very particular. And so you could figure out how to compost a pig or a cow. But you'd have to have a pretty legit system to run it. Yes.
So for the eggshells, we're avoiding them because we'd rather not have pests in it or because it's bad for the compost pile? Because it's just eggshells are getting produced constantly and I don't want to wash it.
Yeah. Well, yes, the question is, do we not want to put eggshells in for our sake, or is it bad for the compost pile? I would say you don't want a compost pile totally loaded with eggshells, but calcium is important, and those eggshells are filled with calcium and some nitrogen as well. Um, so part of it is, if you're not willing to really grind them up, then what's going to happen is you're going to throw, like, say you just like cracked a bunch of eggs and you threw them in your pile. When that pile is finished, you may have a high likelihood of having just a bunch of eggshells still in your pile. If you grind them up, then it will help. But we suggest that if you're going to do it, make sure you just crack them up. I think even if you finally crack them and throw them in there, you're going to be fine. So, how are you going to make one of these piles? Well, this is what we call the lasagna method. It's what I suggest doing as a start. And what you do is you start out with a little bit of brown at the bottom, dried leaves and pine needles. Then you move to vegetable scraps and grass clippings. These are just examples, but you start out with a brown. You do 50% of a brown, 50% of a green. You throw some water over the top of it, and then you put some soil. And that soil helps insulate it, it helps inoculate it. And so some of those bacteria that are going to be breaking it down will just already be there. And it will help keep some pests away. I heard somebody talk about having rats and things like that. To cover with a level of like basically some soil or some finished compost, because of the high carbon that's in it, it's going to catch not just extra nitrogen gassing off, it will catch a lot of the smell as well. And so animals won't really find out that you have a bunch of veggies just tucked into the scrap pile.
The soil is just the sand in my yard there.
Yes, you can go ahead and just pick up some of the sand in your yard and throw it in there. Um, then we go again and we keep filling up this thing. Now, in classes that I've taught before, we didn't really go over this like vital point of when you make a compost pile. A lot of people, when we mess up compost piles, we think of this idea that we put this composter in our backyard and we like we cooked breakfast this morning and we had some leftover veggie scraps. So we walked out to the compost pile and we dumped it in there. And then the next day we cooked some veggies and we tossed them in there. And I cracked some eggs the next day and I put them in there. Well, you can do that, but you're never going to have a finished compost pile. It's best to kind of try to save up as much as you can and then do it in a batch form. Because if we keep adding things, we'll never get it finished and we'll never really get the ratios all that great because we're just throwing in different things. So I would suggest really trying to either save things up. I know some people put them like in their freezer and then they toss them in. Or again, if it's grass clippings, you can just put them in a drier place or have all your browns ready and know you're about to mow the lawn and then you like dump everything in. Um, but we don't want to have the continual compost pile that I've seen a lot of people's backyards where it's just like, oh, I throw something in every other day, but it doesn't really look like much. And why is that? Because we are doing aerobic composting, which has to do with oxygen. You can do anaerobic composting, but it's a much more difficult art. Like, have you guys ever had like those loamies? I think that's how they work. Where you have like those tabletop ones where you throw your scraps in there. It's kind of heated, dehydrated, and then they're heated, right? And they're like broken down. It's almost like what's the big one? That's biochar. People are really into biochar right now. But I digress. We work with oxygen. Oxygen is going to be so important. It is the most neglected part of a compost pile. And what's going to happen is we're going to try to get as much oxygen to the bacteria in the pile. So we've given the bacteria the right amount of food, we've given them enough water, but we need to turn this pile. And that means just literally flipping the pile over to get the oxygen in there. And once they do, there's a picture of the composter you'll be getting. You'll have oxygen getting in from basically all sides of it, and then it will pump out hot air. It is not uncommon to walk out and see just a steaming compost pile if you're doing it right. It wants to get up to some pretty high temperatures, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But air is going to be really the gasoline to this. If the more you flip your pile, You can overflip it for sure, but if you're flipping on a pretty regular basis, you're going to get compost way faster. If you don't flip it, it could take you some good amount of time. So how we aerate this is that one, the reason why we do the lasagna method is because you want to have porosity. If we put a bunch of green stuff and a bunch of brown stuff right on top of each other, then all the green stuff would condense down and it would get kind of tightened up. And one, there wouldn't be airflow in there. And then two, you have all your brown down here, but it needs to get mixed in with that green over time. And as it does, we'll be feeding the carbon to the bacteria, but they're also getting the nitrogen as well, so they'll break it down quickly. So there are tools that you can get for this. The nice part about the compost that you guys are getting is that it looks kind of like this here. This is exactly it. Um you can this is a like a really dramatic example of it, but you can pop the siding off of it and just move it over and then take a pitchfork and just flip it in. And I do suggest a pitchfork is probably your best tool for this outside of, some of these tools you can get where you're not moving the composter, you're basically just sliding it down and turning it and flipping it up so that you can turn from the inside of the compost pile. That's how you're going to get fresh air in there. Um, so if you do this method, all the stuff at the top then moves the bottom, all the stuff at the bottom moves the top, it all gets aerated, it's less compressed. And then you just want to make sure that it's still wet. It doesn't need to be sopping wet, but it needs to be covered with water so that the bacteria can continue to use it. One thing about this composter that you guys will be getting today is that it has holes all through it. That's great for aeration. It's much more difficult to keep this pile wet if you're doing it in a season where we're not getting rain every day. So you just need to make sure that you're going out there and spraying it with some water. Um, all right. So we have any questions here? Yes.
I have a question. So, I mean, since you're going and flipping it, then does that defeat the purpose of putting the soil on top to reduce the amount of pests that come in?
I
Or are you
mean,
just gonna put soil on top of it after you flip it again?
no, you do. So that's a good question. Yes. So the question is, if you're flipping it, is it defeating the purpose to put the layer of soil in there in the first place? One, for the sake that it's going to inoculate the pile, no. But two, in that initial stage of decomposition, it might just help keep it all together, and it's going to increase the amount of like carbon within the pile. It won't be covered in soil when you do flip it, but hopefully within those first couple of flips, it'll already kind of be off to the races, especially because we've thrown the soil in there. Yes.
So once you build that initial pyramid,
Yes.
then it's going, or do you have to do that like often? Like that's
The pyramid. So the question was, once you build the initial pyramid, are you ready to go, or do you need to continue to add to it? The answer is, once you build that initial pyramid, you just want to, like, that's it. You just leave it at that, and then you flip it until it turns to compost, and then you do it again.
do it again as in you make another pile?
Yes.
Like so you use all that compost.
Yeah, so as you can see here, you'll start with like a big pile of leaves and everything. It will condense down to about a third of that size, and it will turn into compost. And then you move that compost out, use it in your garden, and then you start the pile again.
So you keep flipping until it turns to compost.
Yes. And I have a video, I think, somewhere in here of what it looks like over time as we flip it. How often do you flip it? I would say my preference is flipping it about twice a week is like a good thing. You can probably flip it more, but I feel like over flipping it is not as common. But yeah, twice a week is a good amount. But once a week is fine too. Um, water, just come out there with a hose and spray it with a hose. If it gets too wet, you're gonna lose the amount of oxygen that will go through it. And if it's too dry, nothing's gonna happen. Everything's just gonna be kind of low on water, and so they're gonna conserve energy and not be breaking things down as quickly. So you just want it to be damp, but you don't want to just be like drenched wet. If it rains, you're fine. But I wouldn't go out and water it. Any questions on that? Sweet. Where should I put my composter? Well, you want it in a shaded area so that it's not getting hit with direct light and drying out. And you also want to avoid areas that will like kind of interfere, whether you have like an HOA or something, you want to talk to somebody about having like a composter in your front yard. And it does have the capacity if you do it, if you mess something up in the equation, you can fix it, but it might still smell bad, and that might be what's telling you. So you might want to have it in a place where it's not wafting next to you when you open up your back door. Um, and you want it to be close to a water source. It's really helpful to have it somewhere near a hose that you can just go out and spray, or if you have a rain barrel or something, you can just kind of run water over to it. Yes.
You don't have to go like explain this now, but we just moved here and our backyard has one of the black plastic composting.
Yeah.
So at any point you can tell if there's a difference between that and that.
Like you have the one that looks like an upside down trash can.
Yeah, black.
It's all pretty much the same thing. Yes.
Just want to remind you, please repeat any ever again.
Yes.
Everybody online, we have 3 people viewing online right now. They can't hear anything unless somebody is mic'd up.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I do have a question, Mike.
Mic out the audience. And if the audience wants to keep passing it around amongst yourselves to whoever has a question,
Perfect.
online, I'll for you.
All right, thank you. So the question was, if you have one of those black plastic composters that it looks like a flipped over trash can you still use it? It works in the exact same way. There's not really any difference unless it doesn't have any aeration holes, but most of them do. Some are kind of like more convenient, like they have like a flap at the bottom that you like open up and the soil like dumps out, but I would just suggest turning it and then just moving it over and taking it. So it's the same thing. All a composter is just like a space to put it and look nice. Because we compost out of like pallets at our office, and it works the same way. It just depends on how much compost you have. Um, with that being said, you do need a certain amount of compost to be able to do it right. It needs to be able to insulate itself. You can't just have like a pile this big. You need to have like basically one of these containers pretty much full to be able to get a good pile, a good amount of compost out of it, and for the process to work really well. So here's an awesome picture of kind of this decomposition here. And this is what it will look like if you just keep adding stuff. You'll just have like all the not great stuff at the top or even mixed through here if you're turning it. But you'll eventually get, it's just very magical. You'll just get soil one day. You'll come out and be like, who dumped soil all in my compost bin? But it's really just breaking itself down. All right, so when the compost is finished, it has a dark brown color, it's crumbly, it's loose. The best way to explain really good compost is you pick it up in your hand and you crush it, and you open up your hand and it maintains the form and the shape of where you crushed it, but then if you just gently shake it, it will crumble back apart. So it has a good composition, it's still aerated. It smells earthy. If it smells bad, give it another few turns. It doesn't have any recognizable parts to it. Now, if you put in like a big stick, that stick is not going to break down that quickly. So just know that like some of the bigger chunks of things may not break down, even if everything else looks like it's finished. Fine to use it. Um, and it's shrunk to about a third of its original volume. It can take about 3 months' time. I think you can really beat that number if you're turning it consistently, especially in a warmer season where the bacteria will be more active. But I cannot teach this class without putting in a slide here about what it actually means to have finished compost according to the USDA. So, how people do it out in our organic farms is they have to follow this very specific model. This is how our compost pile works here. We have bacteria inside your pile, right? And it's going to start out at room temp or whatever temperature it is outside. And then we have this mesophilic phase where these mesophilic bacteria start to eat up a bunch of different nutrients and different parts of the decaying plants, and they actually build the temperature within the pile. And then the pile will reach anywhere between about 131 to 177 degrees. So it'll get really warm. I've seen some like people actually put a water tank underneath them and use it to heat water. I wouldn't suggest it because that tank could crack, but that's how hot it gets, is that you could really use it as a water heater. So it stays that hot, and then it will vary for how long, but you need to keep it in that temperature range for about 3 days in order to get it to be considered finished compost. The reason why is because that means it will actually be free of pathogens. So you will sterilize your pile. You won't have anything that could potentially be a foodborne illness. And also, if you did put weeds in there or any kind of seeds, that will basically deactivate any seeds within your compost pile as well. So if you want to know how to do that exactly, there might be some notes in that publication I gave you on how to do it. But the key is you get one of those long composting thermometers and you just stick it in the pile and it will tell you what the center temperature of that pile is. So that's how you make true finished compost, and that's how you make sure your compost pile is doing well. And it can stay up there for about 15 days. So when you use this finished compost, you can basically use it as it doesn't have much as a fertilizer, but you can apply it with other fertilizer sources to make them more effective to be able to hold on to more of that fertilizer. A lot of your leafy greens will love to be like when we plant leafy greens, I'll typically like you dig out your hole for the seedling, you put the seedling in the hole, but instead of putting the dirt back onto it, you grab a handful of compost and put it there. It's got a low amount of nitrogen. Those leafy greens love nitrogen. And so it's great. I would suggest to a lot of people if you're gardening, adding even just like a quarter inch of it to any of your beds and working it in each season will be super helpful. Um, as your garden kind of continues on, you'll keep kind of nourishing that soil. Some other people who I know would, I mean, it works really great. Some other agents will just grow straight out of their compost pile. So if you like basically pick up your composter and move it somewhere else and you have this pile of really rich organic matter, you can put a sweet potato in it and then it grows great sweet potatoes, or put a squash in it and do a mound of squash. Like the world's your oyster with this thing because it is really great soil, even though we said it's not soil, but it's a good growing medium to be able to produce vegetables. Some people, there's still kind of a debate about like, should you grow in straight compost or should you not grow in straight compost? I've never seen any adverse effects from growing in just pure compost. It should be pretty great growing medium. All right. So now we get to troubleshooting, which is my favorite part because it's really, really simple. So you've added all of your stuff into the pile, and now it's just fine tuning. If you're getting this rotten odor, you want to turn the pile and you don't want to moisten it. And you want to add extra brown to be able to soak up that smell because it's just carbon. That carbon's just going to pick up that smell. So you can add some, maybe you have some paper trimmings, like something like you shredded paper or some cardboard you shredded or some leaves. You can toss any of those things in there. It's really high in carbon. It'll soak up that smell really fast. If you're getting that ammonia odor, that just means, again, you have too much green and you want to turn that pile and add brown. Now, the other side of it, oh, yes.
When you say you or that you can use shredded paper, does it matter what's printed on that paper? Like what it'll be
So the question is, if you are using paper, does it matter what's printed on the paper? The only suggestion I would give you is don't use things that have a waxy coating to it. Outside of that, most of your inks are pretty safe. So, um, so those are the one side, too smelly and it just is not looking great. It's kind of just like a wet mess. Turn it and throw in brown. If nothing is happening, then turn it and throw in some green. See where this is going here? So it's like, I need more gasoline. It's like, throw in the green. It's just looking too gross. I'm going to throw in some brown and let it kind of marinate. And then you can kind of tune your pile in by just using your nose and by what it looks like to go. So, yes.
cardboard from like cardboard boxes when you use it? Do you have to like cut it up or shred it or just throw a piece in?
So, I have to rephrase the question. So the question was, can you use cardboard? Yes, you can use cardboard from just about any boxes you have. Just take all the tape and staples off. And then I would suggest shredding it for the sake that you're getting more surface area. But at its core, cardboard is already pulped wood. So it's like kind of like oatmeal at that point for the bacteria. Um, but yes, so you can use cardboard. So, who here has had a pile that just feels like they threw everything in and they just did nothing? Anybody? Yes. So, again, you throw some green in there, it'll keep working for you. And then if you have a pile that just was really stinky, you didn't want to have to do anything with it, you just throw in some paper or some leaves, turn it out, it'll go away in time. And so, if you're having issues with raccoons or different kinds of pests, just remember that turning the pile for one will increase the heat and keep a lot of things away. Like we have a lot of cockroaches at our office with this with our piles that we have, it's because we don't turn it enough. It doesn't stay at a high heat. The cockroaches don't want to be in like a steaming pile. They want to be like somewhere where it's a regulatable temperature. And same with these guys. If you have a lot of, rats and raccoons eating stuff, some of the issue is that you're putting stuff in that's attracting them, and you're also not like adding the necessary things to cover it up, adding extra browns to follow it, or even just tucking it into the pile does seem to help. It's putting off a smell that's attracting them. Yes.
So the first time I composted, I stupidly put meat in it and invited the bears in my neighborhood to a buffet. And I got really scared. So I stopped doing that. I just have some bucket in my porch now that's screened in. And no more meat. But are you saying that I could try this again, leave the meat out, have the right ratio, bears don't come back?
Yes. If you're dealing with the right ratio and you have enough high carbon stuff in there, it's not going to emit a smell that should bring other things in. And you can also bury the sides in a couple of inches just in case. Like that helps bring it to a lower level and stuff isn't like things can't like at least not small critters can just like lift it up out of the ground and start to like pull things from the middle of the pile out. That should help keep it a little bit more secure. Um, all right, so you don't have to scan this QR code because I've given a lot of you guys a survey. But here is my information. If you have any further questions about it, we have some helpful links as well on compost. And that concludes the lecture portion, but we do have a compost bin that I wanted to just show you guys how to set it up. But I have a question in the back. Yes. Yeah, I would say over time, if I mean you are feeding it, so it's gaining more over time, but it's also not being utilized. You kind of want to finish out that pile, take it somewhere. You can even leave like half of it in there to help your next set to like add it into your next pile, but you want to be scraping some of that off to give to your plants as well. And I didn't say that question, but the question was if you have an ongoing compost pile, um, can is it just adding more to it? And the answer is yes, but you should use it.
Briefly explain the temperature thing, thermometer thing to like avoid pathogens and like because you're mentioning that you want to water it and flip it often, but there's a period of time where you shouldn't flip it because you want it to build up and
Okay, so the question is, if I have you right, is if we want to keep it at a good temperature, we shouldn't be flipping it in order to maintain that temperature there. Um,
that the key.
yeah, that key temperature. The answer to that is that even flipping it is actually going to keep it at that temperature. So you want to be flipping it because it's going to get up there and it's using so much energy, but as it uses more energy, it's actually going to lose oxygen. So by flipping it, you're actually going to it's almost like blowing air into a fire. It's going to keep it warm.
It gets to a certain temperature before they cool down and use it.
Yeah, if you're staying on a steady pace with flipping this thing, let me restate the question again. Sorry. So the question is, I'm sorry. Once again, it's if you put the. Can you rephrase it for me?
Yeah, so if you use that thermometer, you're just making sure it hits a threshold temperature for a certain amount of days.
Yes.
Dip back down and then you can use it. But you want to make sure
Yeah.
it's that threshold for 3 days or something too.
Yeah. So the question is, if you're using the thermometer, you want to make sure it's hitting a threshold for a certain amount of days. So it will go for as long as it needs to break it down itself down. It actually eventually the thermophilic bacteria will run out of stuff that they want to do and they will just start to die down and then the pile will start to cool itself off. So what you're doing is you're getting the um you're getting the pile up to heat, and then once it's warm, you're flipping it, still once or twice a week, and you're maintaining that temperature, and then you want it to be maintained for at least 3 days, but it could go way longer. And if it's not maintaining that amount of temperature, you can add a little bit more green to it, and it will help kind of bring it back to life. Or if it looks like if it's in need of some water, or it's not moving fast enough, it's typically like it'll need a little bit more nitrogen to keep it up to that heat. But for the most part, It will do its thing and then it will just drop down on its own. Even if you keep turning it, it'll be like, why is my temperature decreasing? And it's because the biological process has already taken place. Yes.
Okay. So we have a black trash bin that's the upside down
Yeah.
trash. Probably similar in volume to the ones that you're handing out. Like, how much how much green do I need to save up before I start this process then? Because like, let's say, I mean, we have a bunch of kitchen grass and stuff. Like,
Mhm.
if lawn trimming can help, and then what's the ratio of the green to the brown?
Y-
That you know.
Yeah, I would suggest the easiest starting point is just to go 50-50. So if you have a trash bin, oh, the question is how much green or brown should you be saving up? Depending on the size of what you have, try to find the amount of green that would fill half that bin. So if I had just like a bag of yard trimmings, I could just like set it in that bin and be like, oh, I'm halfway there, or I'm a quarter of the way there. I'm gonna need a second one of these. Then I would get that, and then I would grab a bag of leaves, or if I didn't have enough fallen leaves, I would grab some extra paper and cardboard, and then I would fill it up the second half of the way there, and then I would actually, I would just go, then I would go by like quarter to quarter, and put them in, and then start my process to flip it. Yes.
You mentioned that if you notice a foul odor, you could add more brown, I guess. But could you also add more soil? Is there a downside to adding more soil?
So the question is, if you have a foul odor, could you add more soil instead of adding more brown? Well, at its core, if you're adding healthy soil, it's going to be full of carbon, and so it should do the same trick, right? Because it's the same thing as the brown. The only thing is, um, you know, it would still take a lot of soil as well, so why not use something that's like almost like more purely carbon? And soil is kind of has other things bonded to the carbon within it. It would work the same way, but it's easier just to add something like shredded paper. It's got a high amount of carbon, very accessible for the bacteria. Yes. Oh, okay, perfect. So any other questions? Are we good? I got a question in the back.
You said in the villages when they did a top dressing of soil, did they turn that into the soil or did they just throw it over the top and then put the sod and painting on top of that?
I'd have to look at the report, but I'm pretty sure they did turn it in.
And you would recommend doing.
Yeah, I would do like a light turn, and you don't want to like just send it down deep. But yeah, I would suggest, especially if you're laying sod anywhere, getting just a few bags of compost and putting it down underneath it, and not fertilizing right when you put down the sod. Everybody does that. But don't do that. Then you can set up for a good patch of sand. Not a good patch of sand, a good patch of grass for you. You don't want patches of sand. Okay, question in the back.
Yes, so when you build your initial pile, before you flip it first time, there's some specific time you should wait to shut the flipper?
Um, so the question is, if you build your initial pile, is there a certain amount of time that you should wait before you flip it? I would say it's the same amount of time at which you feel like you're going to flip it. So if you want to go on a week-to-week basis, I would let it sit for about a week, and then I would flip it. If you're going bi-weekly, 4 days or so, and just let it kind of do its thing, and then you start flipping it. Any other questions? Sweet. Okay. Let me go snag a composter, and then I will show you guys how to set one of these things up. Oh, we have one. Sweet. So you too will be able to take home one of these geobins.
If you're a city of Winter Park resident.
If you're a City of Winter Park resident. Yeah, sure. Perfect. Thank you. I'll just take this. Okay, so I got the pleasure of actually being able to use one of these. The City of Winter Park gave me one when I first started teaching this class. It worked really well, but once again, just one of the caveats about it is that it has so much aeration that it's going to dry out quicker. And also, it comes in a really, really, eco-friendly container. They did the best for shipping. It's really small. The only thing is this is a wrapped piece of plastic. So when we open it up today, you're going to be like, "Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to like keep this thing apart and it wants to collapse in on itself. I will tell you over time it will fit to form. So don't just go home and open this up in your backyard and just kind of let it sit there because it's just going to look wonky. Wait till you have what you're going to fill it with, then open it up and then dump it in there and it will hold a more circular shape. And then over time it will just keep that shape. But trying to fight with this thing and leaving it open before you put stuff in it, it just isn't worth it. So perfect. I can have you hold this microphone. Okie dokie. I might need somebody else's help here too. I like to work with two people. Thank you. Okay, so we cut off the plastic on this. And avoid all your major arteries. Last time I taught this class, I did not have a pocket knife on me, and it took forever to get this whole thing apart. And I had other people over here like trying to help me, trying to give me like car keys and stuff. And I'm just like, no, 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 I got this, I got this. So once you fight this impossible piece of plastic on here, you're on to composting. All right, so I'm gonna have you hold this end.
Okay.
So this is a pretty variable size. You can really do whatever you want to. I would still go a little bit bigger. I wouldn't just do like a tube size like this big because again, we want some insulation of this thing because it's going to be building up heat. But as you unroll this, and roll it out and roll it out, it can get pretty dang big. I think it can get up to like a cubic yard or something like that. And then you get it out to about the size you want to. I don't really worry too much about unraveling the whole thing if I feel like I have the right size. And then you grab this bag of little plastic pieces. Grab yourself a few of them. All right, now we're going to make a little circle out of this. So let's bring it in. We overlap it. And then I'll have you hold that. And then what you do is you see how there's a lot of small dots and then like big oval looking slots over here? You find a place where you can line up the end of this with another set of the oval slots. And then you push in one of these plastic pieces and turn it sideways, and it will lock it into place. And then you do that with the next one. And there you go. Like I said, it's kind of awkward and oblong when you first started, but over time it will just turn into a circular bin.
So
To
we
load it
cut
with
this
stuff.
off.
You can cut it off. I like to leave mine just in case I feel like I need to have a bigger composting project. I can just build it out. And I'm sure you could arc this in so the rolled up part isn't touching all the compost so it doesn't get gross.
Yeah.
But that's how you're going to set one of these things up at home. Question? Yes. Question is, do you recommend putting in a ditch to make it more stable? You could. I would still say the best way to stabilize this thing is just to fill it with stuff. Then it won't move back and forth. It seemed to work the best for me. Yes.
If you were to stretch this out in your backyard or wherever, and just leave it for a while, will it take some of that free form out of it?
Yeah, I don't really know. Yeah, the question is, can you stretch this out and take out some of the preform? I don't really know the answer to that question. I haven't tried it yet. Didn't really come to mind. Yes, question.
So, you are out of microplastics. Is there a recommended vessel for composting that is not with plastic?
Well, okay, so the question is there a non-plastic composting bin? Yes, the world is your composting bin when it comes to that. So you could do the way we do it at our office is literally like a cubic yard bay. It's actually my favorite system for composting is you can make a wooden like several wooden bays out of it. You can use pallets, which is really easy. You just like literally load like one pallet, two pallet, three pallets. You make like a little U shape and then you throw into it. But if you make multiple bays, which is just helpful at my office, is we have 3 wooden bays and we fill one with stuff. And we do the thing that I said you shouldn't do. We just throw stuff into it. And then we load the last bit of it. And then we start to flip it between like the first and the second bay. And then in the third bay, we start doing that again. We start adding stuff. And once we fill that one up, we're typically done with the other compost. And so we have like a good system, but it's all wooden. and it doesn't really decay all that much. And I think it's made out of kiln treated as well. It's not even pressure treated. So that's that. No, you're good. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yes.
We have one composting bin when we turn it. Putting it in the pile, wrapping it back again.
Yeah, so the question is, if we have one compost bin, how do we do the turning process? So there's two different things you can do. One, you can um, just you can get one of the composting tools, or you can try to use a shovel or whatever you got at your best, and just push it down and pull from what's up at the bottom and try to do a flip like that. That amount of jostling will still bring a lot of oxygen into the pile. You can also just pick up this and move it over, and it will still kind of be structured, and you just flip back into it. All right. Is that all the questions? Are we all ready to be pro composters? Okay. Oh yes.
Question on, so, we can like call a number or something and ask.
Yes, you can reach out to the local Orange County Extension office and we will field any of your composting questions you have. And even if you wanted to get super advanced with composting, we will walk you through the process. We've seen it all. So, that's what we do. I gave a lot of you surveys, exit surveys. So if you have them, if you'd feel free to just come down and drop them off at this table down here, it'd be super helpful. And I can take this from you. Thank you. And I just want to say thank you again, and feel free to stop by the IFAS Extension office. We have awesome gardens to check out and a lot of composting bins, just about everyone on the market. And good luck.
You so